the different countries, state to state, talk to each other. I think that's also part of the whole puzzle. I'm going to go a little deeper on the heat action plans. Heat action plans have been an important tool, primarily based right now, at least in India, and there is active work on looking at more granular and more deeper and more informed heat action plans, largely based on early warning systems and preparedness. What in your view could the next generation of heat action plans look like?
In my view, heat action plans have two major components. There's more, but we'll focus on two. As you said, one are the heat wave early warning and response systems, and I will emphasize and response. It's not just having a warning, it's knowing what has to be done when there is a warning, making sure that individuals know what kind of services they can have access to and have the resources for those access, so that people will take action to protect themselves, their family, their friends, and their colleagues. That tree planting programs can make quite a difference in terms of the heat that people suffer during a heat wave. There's also infrastructure changes. White roofs will help cool buildings. Green roofs for big buildings can make a significant difference in the temperature within a building. And of course, you have to work together for this long-term urban planning along with the heat wave early warning and response system, so that it's seamless for the public. But that does, as we talked a moment ago about governance, thinking about all of the different actors that should be involved and how to effectively engage them and make sure that they work together. You don't want to have tree planting programs that don't take into account climate change, planting trees that aren't going to survive in a hotter climate. You want to think about how the health of the most vulnerable could be affected by any changes that are implemented.
Because this has not been addressed anywhere in the book, and have you considered this, and particularly ISCO mode, because that's going to play a very important role if it is incorporated in this. But India has very bad experience of ISCO, so you have to also devise some ways so that it succeeds. So that's my point. Thank you.
Maybe did you get that? I think the larger point is, where will the money come? So any experience you have to share on that?
It's a good question, and it's an important challenge. And again, this comes back to what's possible in a local context. That in some places there's going to be regulations about buildings in terms of the design, green roofs, white roofs, but also in terms of the orientation of the building, the way you can get ventilation across the building, how windows are structured, the materials that buildings are made of will certainly change over time to be more responsive to the hotter temperatures we're facing. And so one avenue is regulation, to build this in to our systems today so that buildings will be more comfortable in a warmer future. The question of retrofitting is always more complicated. There can be incentives for businesses, for individuals who own a residence. It's more difficult for people who rent. And so more work does need to be done on how to ensure there is adequate financing, but ultimately people are going to demand better buildings as they understand different designs will be better for their health, and will ask for that, which will then push building owners to make change.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Coordinated action is essential. And as we've all heard yesterday and earlier today as well, that important steps are already underway, focusing primarily on developing and implementing heat action plans that help authorities and communities respond to heat waves, making active cooling more climate friendly to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and developing national vision documents such as the India Cooling Action Plan, which we'll hear more about later today, to drive action on climate-friendly cooling. A more comprehensive and synergistic approach for dealing with extreme heat is needed, one that goes beyond a heat emergency response plan and cooling technologies, including a matrix of infrastructure and technological solutions and facilitative actions. So you can see some of those elements on the screen. I apologize if the text is too small to read.
Environment, which is also how we reduce the cooling demand through the fit environment, both urban and rural, and of course the second cooling action plan. And the third aspect is about how do we meet that cooling demand by the most efficient equipment in the market available. So with these three aspects, we wanted to kick off, and I'm going to throw in some facts and figures, which I hopefully we can circle back towards the end of the session. As for the International Energy Agency, and we are learning from the IEA, as their energy output for India 2040, the buildings yet to be built and appliances yet to be acquired would drive India's energy demand. At scale, how do we ensure that the communities most vulnerable are not being left out? So that's the context I want to start with. Like saying, Ozone Cell has really been leading the effort on India Cooling Action Plan, and India Cooling Action Plan in many ways has really brought together a lot of us.
Thank you for inviting Ozone Cell in this forum, and I have prepared one presentation, and my presentation is on implementation of India Cooling Action Plan. And as we know that cooling is linked to human health and productivity in the tropical climate, and cooling demand is expected to grow in the future due to rising income, economic growth and urbanization, and which will result in increased consumption of refrigerants and increased requirement of cooling energy. To address the cooling, India is the first country in the world to develop a comprehensive cooling action plan, and ICAP provides a long-term integrated vision to address the cooling requirement with a 20 years time horizon. And overarching goal of ICAP is to provide sustainable cooling and thermal comforts for all while securing economic and social co-benefits besides environmental gains for the society. Development of thematic groups were identified and working groups were constituted to address the cooling, and the thematic groups are space cooling in buildings, air conditioning technologies, cold chain and refrigeration, transport air conditioning, refrigeration and air conditioning servicing sector, refrigerant demand and indigenous production, research and development. And there is a steering committee to guide and oversee the implementation of the idea. 2037-38 are a reduction of cooling demands by 20 to 25%. Reduction of cooling energy requirement by 25 to 40%, reduction of refrigerant demand by 25% to 30%, training and certification of service technicians, recognition of cooling as a thrust area of research. Shows growth in cooling demands by 2037-38, and sector-wise, if we see, building sector will grow 11 times from 2017 to 2037. Transport sector will increase 5 times, cold chain sector will increase 4 times. And space cooling is an important segment of the cooling demand, and intervention scenario projects that 20% cooling demand can be reduced by improving building envelopes by adopting energy conservation building code of BE in commercial building as well as the residential building, and 30% cooling demand can be reduced by improving efficiency of the cooling equipment or appliances. And ECBC also being implemented in the building infrastructure construction project scheme, such as affordable housing of Mahua, university building, airport projects, railway station, metro station.
And what are we doing? Because our our focus right now has been very, short-term, responsive, and very. We're just acting on what's happening and really not looking at long-term preparedness. So introducing nature-based solution is one of the means, tools, approaches to really push for long-term preparedness. I think the context-setting speaker before also talked about really long-term preparedness towards heat. So we use a fair bit of evidence, data, and a lot of on-ground interactions with different stakeholders, groups to really push forward, cities and their planning processes to integrate resilience and move towards long-term preparedness across different disasters, primarily focusing on heat. So, and the big opportunity for all of us is 75% of India's infrastructure, 2050 infrastructure is yet to be built. So embedding climate proofing our infrastructure is really a big opportunity for India. And a quick brief on nature-based solutions. So, different definitions across the world, but focusing on economic benefits, ecological integrity, community resilience, social benefits, and livelihoods really are the big pieces. And some of the examples are urban forests, river restoration, water bodies, smaller interventions, and why these smaller interventions become really important. Just explain that to you in a bit. So heat risk, again, narrowing it on heat risk. These are some examples that we've taken from our Mumbai Climate Action Plan. So WRI, C40 cities, along with the Mumbai City, put out the Climate Action Plan a couple of years ago. So you would see that Dharavi is 5 degrees hotter, and this is in October, than its neighbor Matunga. And these are like clear evidences. So we're not talking about anything up in the air. These are all clear evidences that we've put down in the Climate Action Plan.
And we are seeing at the moment an aggressive trend completely in the opposite direction. We've got to halt that. That's one solution. Second is that we will recognize that very few of us are going to have access to cooling in any case. And so we're going to suffer a great deal because things are heating up. So we have an ambitious program for small homes to be built with the assistance of the state, Prime Minister's Awas Yojana. I have been advocating for incorporating in the financing structure and the support structure of PMAY 3 or 4 small things that every home that is built must incorporate. A reflective roof, perhaps a little bit of insulation, ensure that your windows are properly shaded and that you get good cross ventilation in the home. Everybody I've talked to, whether it is the engineers or the house builders or the owners or the mistries, understand these principles. This just has to be a simple ask. So huge amounts of self-built homes and small homes that are going to be built under the PMAY schemes, you just got to incorporate the SOP in the process to make sure this happens.
Heating our planet more while we are cooling our built environment. And so there are 2 ways UNEP is looking at. We are looking at national level strategies, we are looking at urban cooling measures and working at cities, but also working at building level on passive cooling strategies, integrating passive measures at building level. Nature for Cooling Solutions is a global program of UNEP, which is going to get started in 2025, later part of 2025. Because UNEP has seen that there is science again, knowing that nature can reduce. We have seen in Chennai, for example, through our UHI work, that it has the potential to reduce as much as 7 degrees Celsius outdoor comfort. So we can achieve affordable thermal comfort through nature. So we are going to help cities implement nature, as well as not only just implement, but also do something which is not available right now, is quantifying the cooling reduction benefits from nature, which is a long process. So post implementation, this will be set up,
which is focused on a resilient workforce, and how do we involve communities to actually partake in this solution and also contribute. So my 2 or 3 points that I would like to make, 3 points, is that I think all of us, even in the last session, we're discussing about that how do we move from research and studies and analysis to solutions, because that's where I think India really needs, more action and more implementation and more deployment, so that people who are feeling the brunt of, this urban heat phenomena can actually benefit from that. So I think moving from, I think, research and analysis to solution, I think is one of the thing, and that's where resilient workforce also come into picture. The unit of engagement, as Akash mentioned, that it could be at the building level, it could be at the neighborhood level, it could be at the municipality level, it could be at the cities level. So are we looking at hyper-local solutions, or are we looking at a much more macro level solutions, I think, which is at state or national level? So we need to probably will have a little bit of chance to discuss that. The other thing is that when we are looking at resilient workforce and how to marry solutions, and which will give them an opportunity to contribute to this tremendous need that India is facing as far as heat stress and heat mitigation is concerned. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to invite our first speaker. How do we transfer learning from project to sales?
How do we effectively move people given these gaps exist, or how do we push people to actually fill these gaps?
Thanks for the question. So on the first part, I'll keep it short. I think the biggest challenge that we face, and just to give context here, we work as the center, we work on looking at how do we change behaviors on the ground. So that's the context of the work. So I think the biggest challenge that we face is how do we actually make communication relevant to people's goals and what matters to them on an everyday basis so that they take action. Because things like climate change, global warming, sustainability, these are too amorphous, they are too distant, they are not immediate as goals, and they are not effective in bringing about behavior change. So I think the big challenge that we face is how do we make that communication effective by making it relevant, personal, and immediate to everyday lives of people. Now, if you've asked me the second thing on what are some of the learnings that have been for us to address this gap, so is that okay if I take a couple of minutes to answer that? Just I had 3 points that I wanted to make. So I think the first lesson that, and it's kind of building on the point that I just made, the first lesson is we have to actually stop talking about climate. I know that's a bit controversial and all of us are in this room because we care about climate change, and that's fine. But if we want to bring about behavior change, we have to actually talk about goals that actually matter to people. And these could be health goals, they can be economic goals, they could be emotional goals. To give you an example, we did some work where we wanted people to put ACs at 24 degrees. That's for optimal cooling. Now, what the economic framing that we did around messaging was not that it's good for environment, but that every 1% that you put it lower, you're going to spend 6% more on your bills. We've done this even in waste management, where we may link actually waste management to reducing diseases. So that's, on the health side. We've also looked at, cases where we have linked behaviors to pride. I mean, Indore is a classic example where waste management, for example, has been linked to pride in the city. So we need to start firstly thinking not about climate, but actually thinking about goals that resonate. Second thing I would say is that we have to keep our messages very simple. What happens is that things get lost. I mean, these are the climate science, etc., very hard for people to understand. So what do I mean by simplicity? Again, when I'm talking about the AC work that we did, simple communication means that right on the ACs we put a sticker saying 24 degrees. That is it. We are basically saying, we're giving a default number. We're putting it right on the AC at the moment of truth. It's a simple communication, keep it at 24 degrees. It's a nudge at that, time that may get people to actually think about what temperature they're putting it on. So there are examples of when you're even talking about the communication that you're giving. Again, if I look back at waste management, dry, wet, waste, these are complicated languages because something which is actually wet waste can be dry for the